There is a question asked in the oldest book of the Bible, maybe the oldest piece of literature in the entire world, and it is asked by the wrong person, in the wrong place, and the man it is about never gets to hear it. The question is 4 words in English, 7 letters in Hebrew, and every single thing that happens in the next 42 chapters, the deaths, the silence, the ash heap, the arguments, the whirlwind, every bit of it is the universe's answer to those 4 words. The question is this: does Job fear God for nothing? We will come back to what God says at the very end of this book, something so unexpected, so quietly devastating, that most readers walk right past it. We will come back to it, but not yet. First, you need to meet the man. His name is Job. He lives in a place called Uzzi, a region east of Israel, possibly on the edge of Edomite territory, the ancient land of the descendants of Esau. The land is sun-bleached and wide. Job is not an Israelite. He has no Torah, no tabernacle, no priestly lineage. He has only what any man in any age has ever had: his conscience, his family, and his God. And by every measure that matters, he is doing everything right. The text describes him in 4 words that would have stopped any ancient reader cold: blameless, upright, fears God, shuns evil. These are not ordinary adjectives. In the Hebrew world, this is as close to a perfect man as you can get without being the Messiah himself. And God agrees. That is important. God is the one who says it first. Job has 7 sons and 3 daughters. He has 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels. He has 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys. He has a very great household. He is, the text says, the greatest of all the people of the East. And every morning, before the sun is fully up, he rises and offers burnt offerings for each of his children, not because they have sinned, because they might have. That is the kind of man he is. He tends to things invisible. He worries about things that haven't happened yet. He is that kind of father, that kind of worshiper, that kind of man. You would want to be his neighbor. You would want to be his child. Now hold all of that in your mind, because what happens next happens entirely without Job's knowledge, and it will unmake everything he has built. There is a scene in chapter 1 of Job that is easy to read too quickly. You should not read it quickly. The sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, the divine council, the heavenly court, they gather before the Lord. Think of it less like a board meeting and more like a court in session, an ancient royal court where the king receives reports from his messengers, his envoys, his officers who have been out in the world. And among them, pacing in from the side, is a figure the text calls Ha-Satan, the adversary, the accuser. This is not yet the Satan of the New Testament, the symbol of cosmic evil in his full development. Here, in Job, Ha-Satan functions more like a prosecuting attorney. His role is to roam the earth and find fault, to accuse, to test. God opens the conversation. He turns to the accuser and says, "Have you considered my servant Job?" And you can almost hear the pride in it. This is not a divine setup. This is a father pointing to his child. Have you noticed him? Have you seen what he is? And the accuser tilts his head and asks the question, does Job fear God for nothing? In Hebrew, that last word is chinom, kainom. It means without cause, for free, in vain. It is the word you use when a slave is released without payment, when a man is killed without reason, when something happens that makes no sense, because nothing was owed. Chinom, for nothing. What the accuser is really asking is this: is Job's faith real, or is it just a transaction? You have built a hedge around him, Ha-Satan says. You have blessed his work. You have given him everything. Of course he worships you. What else would he do? Take everything away. Stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. This is the most devastating accusation the accuser could have made. Not that Job is secretly wicked, not that Job has hidden sins. The accusation is far more surgical than that. The accusation is, Job is faithful because it pays. Strip the payment, and the faith dissolves. And here is what should stop you cold. God says yes, not yes. Job will curse me, but yes, you may test him. God lifts the hedge. God opens the door, and the accuser walks through it. In a single day, 4 messengers arrive at Job's door. The first, Sabaeans raided the oxen and the donkeys. Your servants are dead. I alone escaped. The second, fire fell from heaven. Your sheep and your shepherds are gone. I alone escaped. The third, 3 bands of Chaldeans took the camels. Your men are dead. I alone escaped. The fourth, a great wind struck the 4 corners of the house where your children were feasting, and they are all dead. 7 sons, 3 daughters, gone. Job tears his robe. He shaves his head. He falls to the ground. And then he says something almost no human being in the history of grief has managed to say with any honesty. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Here's what most people miss. Job is not at peace here. He is not serene. He is devastated. What you are watching is a man, wrecked, weeping, his robe in pieces, his head shaved like a man in mourning, who still refuses to let his theology collapse with his life. He does not understand. He cannot understand. He doesn't even know about the conversation in heaven. He is simply holding on. Round 2 happens fast. The accuser returns to the divine court. God says he still holds fast to his integrity. The Hebrew word for integrity here, tama, means completeness, wholeness, not just moral perfection. The wholeness of a man whose inner life and outer life still match each other, even when his outer life is rubble. The accuser is not impressed. He says, skin for skin. A man will give everything he has for his own life. You haven't touched his body. Touch his body, and then we'll see. So God allows it. Job's body breaks out in terrible sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He sits in the ash heap. He scrapes himself with a piece of broken pottery, and his wife comes to him. We do not know her name. The ancient Aramaic tradition calls her cities. She has lost everything he has lost, every child, every servant, every animal, every coin, and now she watches her husband sit in ashes, broken and raw, and she says, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. People have been too hard on this woman. She is not the villain of this story. She is a mother who buried 10 children in a single day and is watching her husband slowly rot. Her theology is not corrupt. It is just exhausted. She has run out of God. And sometimes grief does that to you. Job looks at her and says, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God and not receive evil? There is love in that rebuke. He does not call her foolish. He says she is speaking as a foolish woman would speak. He knows she is better than this. He knows the grief is talking. And then his 3 friends come. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. They are wise men, respected, experienced, well-traveled. They have made a long journey to sit with their friend, and when they see him, they do not recognize him. His face is unrecognizable. His body is broken. They tear their robes. They throw dust in the air. They sit down with him on the ground. For 7 days and 7 nights, they say nothing, not a word. And that is the only thing they do right in the entire book. Stay with me, because what comes next is where most people's theology gets exposed. Job breaks the silence first. Chapter 3 is one of the most raw pieces of writing in any religious text, in any language. He does not pray. He does not praise. He curses the day he was born. Let the day perish on which I was born, he says. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb and expire? This is not the job of the greeting cards. This is not the patient job your grandmother quoted. This is a man at the bottom of everything, and he is not performing strength. He is telling the truth, and his friends panic. Eliphaz goes first. He is the gentlest of the 3, but even his gentleness carries a blade. He describes a vision he had in the night, a spirit that passed over him, a voice that whispered in the dark. And the message of the vision is simple. No one is fully righteous before God. Therefore Job must have sinned. Therefore Job must repent. Bildad the Shuhite is blunter. He appeals to tradition, to the wisdom of the fathers, to the logic of history. If your children died, he implies, it is because they sinned. If you seek God, you will be restored. The math, he believes, is simple. Zophar the Naamathite is the harshest of all. He tells Job that God is actually giving him less than he deserves. Your guilt, he says, is greater than your suffering. Round after round, across cycle after cycle of speeches, the arguments spiral back to the same center. Suffering is the result of sin. God is just. Therefore Job has sinned. He just cannot see it. He just refuses to admit it. And Job fights back. This is the part of Job that most sermons skip because it is uncomfortable. Job does not accept the framework. He does not confess since he did not commit. He insists on his innocence, not out of arrogance, but because lying would be a betrayal of reality. And Job will not betray reality, even to make God look better. He says God has become his enemy. He says God is hunting him like a lion. He says he wishes he could take God to court, find a mediator, a go-between, someone who could put a hand on both of them and let Job speak. But then, in chapter 19, in the middle of his most anguished speech, something extraordinary breaks through. I know that my Redeemer lives, Job says, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. This verse comes from a man who also said, in the same speech, that God had stripped his glory from him and demolished him on every side. That is what real faith looks like. Not certainty that everything will be fine, not peace that passes understanding. Faith is anguish that hasn't let go. The three friends run out of arguments. They fall silent. And then, here's the part nobody tells you. A young man speaks. His name is Elihu, the son of Barachiel the Buzite. He has been sitting there the entire time, listening, and he is furious. Furious at the three friends, because they condemned Job and still could not answer him. And furious at Job, because Job kept justifying himself rather than trusting God. Elihu introduces something none of the others have considered. Maybe suffering is not punishment. Maybe suffering is formation. Maybe God uses the breaking of a man to open his ears, to teach him what comfort and prosperity never could. God does not rebuke Elihu at the end of the book. Of everyone who speaks across those 36 chapters of debate, Elihu alone escapes condemnation. Note that. But Elihu is still not the answer Job is waiting for, because the answer Job is waiting for is not going to arrive in the form of a theological argument. It is going to come in a whirlwind. God does not answer Job from a calm sky. He does not answer from a quiet room. He answers from a Sierra, a violent tempest, a storm that picks up dust and sand and makes the air impossible to breathe. And his first words are not comfort. They are questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. The sarcasm is real, and so is the point. For 4 chapters, God takes Job on a tour of creation, the foundations of the earth, the gates of death, the storehouses of snow, the constellations. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loose the belt of Orion? The birth of mountain goats in the wild, the behavior of the war horse that snorts at the sound of battle and cannot be held back, the nesting of the hawk, the behemoth, the great beast of the land, whose bones are like bronze tubes, who drinks up a river without trembling, the Leviathan, the monster of the deep, which no trap can hold, whose breath sets coals ablaze, smoke from its nostrils. God does not answer the question Job asked. He does not explain the children. He does not explain the source. He does not produce the ledger that shows the accounting behind Job's suffering. What he does instead is expand Job's frame of reference until Job's question, though never answered, begins to look different. You live in one room of an infinite house. God is saying, you cannot even understand the architecture of that one room, and you want to audit the whole building. Pay attention to this. There is a difference between being silenced and being quieted. Job is not silenced. He is not shamed into submission. He is quieted the way a child is quieted when a parent who has been absent suddenly walks through the door. The grief doesn't vanish. The questions don't disappear. But the presence changes everything. Job says, "I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." He saw God, not the explanation, not the logic, not the theology, God himself. And that, it turns out, is the only answer that was ever going to work. Now, this is the moment I told you to wait for. God speaks to Eliphaz, the senior friend, the wise man, the one with the vision, and God is angry. He says, "My wrath is kindled against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Read that again. Job, who accused God of hunting him. Job, who demanded a mediator. Job, who said God had become his enemy. Job, whose speeches were so raw, so borderline accusatory, that his friends called them impious. That Job, God says that Job spoke what was right, and the friends who defended God at every turn, who never once questioned his justice, who told Job to repent and return and get back in line. They did not speak what was right. This is not a small theological footnote. This is the book's final verdict on how to talk to God when your world is falling apart. Honest, anguished, wrestling speech. The kind that grabs God by the collar and demands to know why. That is more acceptable to God than polished, safe, theologically correct speech that sacrifices truth on the altar of comfort. God does not want your answers. He wants your honesty. The story ends the way you would expect a Bible story to end, and also not. Job is restored. His fortunes are returned, doubled. He has 7 more sons and 3 more daughters. The daughters are given names: Jemima, which means dove; Keziah, which means cinnamon; Karen Hapuk, which means horn of eye makeup, which, in the ancient world, was a name given to extraordinarily beautiful women. The text tells us they were the most beautiful women in all the land, and that Job gave them an inheritance alongside their brothers, which was unusual and countercultural for the ancient world. Even at the end, Job is doing something quietly radical. He lives to be 140 years old. He sees his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren. He dies old and full of days. The accuser, Satan, is never mentioned again. Let that sit there. The 4th century preacher John Chrysostom called Job the athlete of God, the fighter in a cosmic contest, the man whose endurance was not merely personal survival, but cosmic proof. Job proved, by his faithfulness under fire, that the accuser's thesis was wrong, that a human being could love God for no reason, that worship was possible without a reward structure, that the hedge was not the point. And this is where the book finally comes back to you right now, with your own version of the ash heap, your own version of the silence, your own version of the friends who have good theology and bad timing. 3 things. The first is this: God is not afraid of your honest questions. Job's most anguished speeches, the ones that sound like accusations, the ones that sound like a man losing his faith, those are the speeches God called right. The carefully composed, theologically sanitized version of your faith is not more holy than the version that says, "I don't understand this, and I need you to show up." If you are angry at God right now, that anger is still a form of facing Him. It is still the conversation. The second is this: the friends were not wrong because they defended God. They were wrong because they lied about Job. They looked at a suffering man and told him it must be his fault. They used God's justice as a weapon against a man God had already called blameless. The lesson is not to stop defending God. The lesson is to stop using God as an excuse to be unkind to the people sitting in front of you in their ashes. And the third takeaway is the one that stays with me. Shalom. For nothing. The accuser asked whether Job's faith was real, whether it would survive the removal of every benefit, whether Job would still be in the conversation if there was nothing left to gain, whether the worship was real or whether it was just a very long transaction. This is not just a question about job. It was never just a question about job. It is a question about you, about whether the faith you carry into your church on Sunday morning is the same faith you would carry into the ash heap on a Wednesday at 2 in the morning, about whether the God you worship is the God you actually believe in, or whether he is the God who has simply been convenient for you so far. Job answered that question with his body, with his skin, with 10 graves and a broken potsherd and 7 days of silence, so heavy it could have crushed him. He loved God. For nothing. That is the whole book. That is the answer the universe was waiting for.